So this next episode is a bit special to me. Not only is the next guest involved in the football club I support, but he has founded an incredible company in Benevolent Capital and has been involved in sports investing for a number of years now. It is an area that I don't think many people really understand. There's a bit of mystery around it, a bit of an aura for sure. And I was so lucky that he invited me into his wonderful home in the US. I interviewed him in his garden. I was there for the morning and early afternoon. Brett Johnson, I just want to say thank you for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to interview you as the co-founder of Benevolent Capital, of which I know you run with your identical twin brother. One thing that struck me, and I'm speaking to the audience now, but one thing that struck me about the conversation was just how happy Brett is now in his role in sports investing within Benevolent Capital than he was as the managing director of Targus, which was a very well-known and is a very well-known tech company in the US. That journey into entrepreneurship, I think Brett tells just so compellingly. Without further ado, are you sitting comfortably? If so, let's get on with it. Roll the credits.
I wonder where I'd be, what I'd be doing if I hadn't just decided to watch that MLS game on that Sunday. To get, in some respects, religious. What I recognize today is how much happier I am being an entrepreneur. 5-6 years ago, we saw the trend where people were going to start to shift to non-alcohol. And Athletic Brewing, where our first investment, was the best tasting non-alcohol beer I'd ever tried. You can't really be a part-time entrepreneur. Like you got to, burn the ship.
But it's been going for a year. This is, I think, the 40th episode.
Okay, nice, yeah. Almost one a week. Well done.
And I want to do it 10, 20 years. Like for me, I think it's just fun having conversations. Yeah. In person is, obviously I know Zoom was a choice, but in person is just so much better.
Yeah. No, again, I appreciate the effort you made.
Well, no, thanks for hosting me. But yeah, I'm delighted to be here, Brett. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming up.
I was toying actually with the idea of what to start off with on the train down. I had this big plan this morning. I just tore it all up on the train. Right. So I know we just spoke at the table as well about some of your early life and the steps you've taken into sports investing. But I think what would be useful for the pod is just a bit of context as to your early life and your early career and some of the context as to why you went into sports investing. Is there any clues that you look back and you go, actually, that makes sense why I went into that particular area?
Yeah, so I guess looking back on it, my parents are both entrepreneurs. So I think there was probably an inevitability that I would become an entrepreneur, but the first half of my career was spent running a fairly sizable global computer accessory company called Targus. I was moved to London to run all the international business, and then eventually I was moved to Southern California to run the whole company. So, as I described it, I was really originally an operator, managing people and as they call it, kind of receiving a W-2, so a paycheck, week in, week out. We sold Targus in 2005, so almost 20 years ago. And I have an identical twin brother, and the two of us decided to start a platform called Benevolent Capital. And Benevolent has become, it's our family office, so it's the umbrella by which we put all of our investments. So everything kind of falls under, again, that umbrella. And I guess specifically I hope to answer your question appropriately, relative to sports, almost exactly 10 years ago, I saw an opportunity where I recognized in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona was the biggest and best market without, as I describe it, a proper professional soccer team. And that entrepreneurial epiphany, I can really say it changed my life. Like from that idea, I then ended up acquiring a stake in a United Soccer League. So United Soccer League it's the level right below Major League Soccer. and I bought a team there called Arizona United, and then eventually rebranded it to Phoenix Rising, brought in some great partners, a lot of whom I still work closely with today. Didier Drogba came and joined our ownership group. He finished his career with us, and from that inception, from that genesis, now I've really kind of developed over the last 10 years a fairly diverse portfolio company of professional soccer teams and private equity, venture capital, and now real estate development. So I've certainly shifted. I'm full-on entrepreneur now.
So turning back, there was a period where, as you say, you're in that W2 zone where you're getting a paycheck every month. You're running Targus, which is an electronics store, I believe. What were your feelings during that period in the context of how fulfilled you were? I suspect it's a very busy, important job, but it seems like you wanted more at that point.
Yeah, it's easier in hindsight. What I recognize today is how much happier I am being an entrepreneur. But I say it all the time. I think if you choose to be an entrepreneur, the universe is going to test you. And you know, for your listeners that are either entrepreneurs or contemplating becoming an entrepreneur, I really believe that everyone goes through an arc on their entrepreneurial journey, where again the universe is really trying to test whether or not you're up for it, you're made for it. And for me, it was about a year into the soccer endeavor, we lost a lease at a stadium that we were playing, that we were doing quite well in that stadium, and we had to pivot an hour away from our core fan base, and the wheels just came off the entire business plan. And fortunately, I was able to trade through it and bring in these partners and rebrand to Phoenix Rising and bring in Didier Drogba. I mean, but for lack of a better analogy, we literally bounced off the tarmac and then went back up. And but if I hadn't been able to trade through it, I honestly believe I would be back in a W-2 environment right now. I think it would have shaken me out, and I would have kind of gone back and said, you know what, I don't know if I'm cut for this entrepreneurial opportunity. So, and you can read almost any great success story from an entrepreneurial perspective, you know, whether it's Phil Knight at Nike, Elon Musk, I mean, like countless entrepreneurs, you almost always you can find a time where their back is completely up against the wall. It's just they're a hair's breadth away from failure, or they have failed and they've just figured out how to reinvent themselves and pick themselves up and do it again.
And during that period at Targus and even before, did you always see yourself as an entrepreneur, or did you see yourself as an employee, and there was maybe a single day or a certain period of time where you saw the light, for instance?
So I certainly loved my time at Targus. I was really blessed to have some great responsibility at a fairly young age. At the time, I was moved to London, as I said, at a relatively young age, traveling all over the world. I loved it. I was very passionate about it. I was brought back to run the whole company. You know, I don't need to go down the full rabbit hole on all of this stuff, but we discovered that the CFO of Targus had been embezzling money. We got hit with, it was right after 9/11 where the economy started to go off the rails, and a combination of things between the CFO, between 9/11. We went through really, really challenging times, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to turn Targus around, that effectively it survived an incredibly difficult time, and then we ultimately sold it, and we sold it successfully. So I'm proud of all of that, and it really gave me a lot more confidence in terms of running a company. You know, I feel almost anyone can run a company when it's going up and to the right, where sales are really growing. It's really when you hit a recession, or you know, you lose a major customer, or you suffer a embezzlement from a trusted advisor and CFO. So, you know, those are the types of things. If you could trade through them, it's far more valuable from an operating perspective, dealing with that adversity. But what I guess where I'm really getting at is, I really feel in my heart I was always an entrepreneur. But I kind of woke up one day, I so prefer, if you will, betting on myself. And I recognize that I can handle my mistakes a lot easier than I can, you know, historically when I've invested in other people, I've been disappointed in some respects with the results. And I kind of realized that they just don't have the same drive, commitment, passion that I have. in terms of my endeavors. And that's where, starting with Phoenix Rising, moving to, we've had a successful group that we put together to acquire Ipswich Town. I've got a big project now in Rhode Island where I'm building a stadium. I've launched a professional soccer team. All of those things, none of them are easy, but again, if they go well, then it's going to be my partners and I that, deserve the credit. And if they go wrong, I view myself as being responsible for it.
And the period in between selling Targus and then starting Phoenix Rising, or Arizona United as it was initially called, how long was that period between finishing one and then starting the other?
Well, it was almost a decade. So actually, it's interesting. So what happened post Targus, even though I had started Benevolent, my brother and I did not raise a dedicated fund. My first investment was a company called TerraCycle, which I'm still on the board of, and TerraCycle is an amazing company that finds ways to divert waste, both pre and post-consumer waste, from landfills. And it's a global company doing quite well. But I raised some money and put it into TerraCycle, joined the board, but none of that, I couldn't take the leap of becoming a full-time sort of private equity or family office manager. And what I found was I was getting approached on operating opportunities. I would get headhunted by someone, call me up and say, look, a company's looking for a president, managing director, CEO, whatever it was. And I would take these consulting gigs, and they would pay the bills. Literally, that's what I would do them for. They would pay the bills, but I had zero connection to the companies. And I realized what a soulless existence that I felt that I was in. And I think I got married. I had my daughter. Then shortly thereafter, my first son arrived, and that was 2014. And that's when I was watching this Major League Soccer game, and that's when I realized MLS was not in Phoenix, and it was as if a light bulb went off in my head, and I turned to my wife after the game and I said, I want to buy an MLS franchise. I want to call the team Phoenix Rising. I had the team name. And I guess, try to put this with some level of humility, but to my credit, I really decided to pursue it, where I feel like a lot of us have entrepreneurial ideas and we don't pursue them. And, or we just say we'll get to it later, if you will. So I feel, I immediately started research, and I found out that there was a team there called Arizona United. I reached out to the owner and I bought half the team. And then, as I said, we lost our lease, had to pivot to a really tough situation. And then at that point, I started looking for local partners, and I among many really important individuals in my life, I partnered up with Berkay Bakai. And Berkay and I are now partners in a host of endeavors. It started with Phoenix Rising. It now extended to Ipswich. And then we have a hospitality company where we have some food halls in California, and we're contemplating kind of expanding our fund beyond our initial Ipswich investment. So it's been a 10-year marriage, if you will, that I'm very, very blessed with. But the two of us share a similar philosophy on sort of entrepreneurial ventures and trying to just get stuff done.
I think there were two things that stood out from what you just said that I'd love to speak about more. So the first is an interesting point, and I totally agree with this. I think something along the lines of a lot of people have ideas, but they rarely follow through. And this is the context of starting Phoenix Rising. It's maybe overly simplistic question, but why do you think people don't follow through on ideas?
I guess life gets in the way. And by life, in some respects, I mean just the reality of bills, having to, put the rent and groceries, pay the rent and groceries, if you will, for lack of a better expression. But for the first several years, I had to kind of keep my day job, if you will. It wasn't until the end of 2016 when I brought Berkay and a bunch of other partners in, and we rebranded it to Phoenix Rising. It was at that point where I made the very conscious decision to stop taking consulting gigs. And I turned all of them away, and I went kind of full entrepreneur. And as I said, shortly thereafter, everything really started to improve. What I started to recognize is you can't really be a part-time entrepreneur. You can't dabble in it. Like you got to burn the ships and say there's no retreat on this thing. But again, it's so much easier said than done. It took me a while to do that because again, with a wife and 2 kids, you got to pay the mortgage. So, but eventually I said to myself, look, if I'm too far into this to now continue to treat it as a hobby. So it took some hustle, if you will, to get to the point where Phoenix Rising literally started to stabilize and rose from the proverbial ashes. And then built some confidence and started to think about other opportunities in soccer, England being one of them, which led to Ipswich. And then was very interested in other opportunities in the United States, specifically with the United Soccer League, where I wanted to find markets where I could go in with the United Soccer League because I believe in the economics and the right market of that league. And again, another entrepreneurial epiphany, almost exactly 6 years ago, I ran into a friend of mine here on the East Coast, up in Rhode Island. I was up in Rhode Island for the day, and he mentioned in an offhand remark, he mentioned that the baseball team, Rhode Island's beloved AAA, which is the minor league baseball team, had announced they were picking up and leaving the state of Rhode Island. And again, just a similar sort of epiphany as I had with Phoenix Rising. I said to myself, I'm going to buy the rights to USL for the state of Rhode Island, and then I want to build a stadium, and I want to look at developing all the surrounding real estate. And we've had a pandemic, and we've had a host of kind of issues that have arisen since then. But I guess, again, to my partners and my credit, we are 9 months away now from completing a stadium. Our team is up and running and playing in a temporary relationship with the local university. And so, it's 6 years of just dogged determination, of not letting any obstacle to derail us. I mean, and truly, 1,000 obstacles have come up along the way, where at any time you could sit there and say, okay, well, that's enough. We just can't. There's no path forward. But we refused to allow that to happen. And as I say, we just kept putting our right foot after the left, and got stuff done. And any single time something came up, my partner and I basically always found a way. We never yielded, if you will, and never retreated. And so, at some point, and I would say to him on some instances, the cost of the stadium went up considerably. And my attitude was, look, there's no retreat on this. Like, we're just going to have to move forward and figure out how to get it done. And I feel very, very grateful that we've been able to do that.
"2016 sounds like the point where everything started in terms of the entrepreneurial journey. How difficult was it making that decision, as you call it, to go all in? Was it very obvious, or actually there were lots of conversations? I appreciate it. So you've mentioned your family and that. Was it quite a tricky back and forth situation, or?
No, I guess it wasn't as tough in maybe I have a selective memory to kind of not dwell on how that time, if you will. I guess as I look back on it now, I'm so grateful that I took that leap. But if you will, Phoenix Rising wasn't enough of a platform to go all in on. Like, I had to find ways to grow it. And so my twin brother and I really started to think about Benevolent Capital, and we started to see opportunities so the benevolent approach is we don't charge management fees from our investors. We provide our investors 100% preferred returns on their investments before we get a catch up or a promote. And we always invest our own money into every deal. So, and we don't set up a blind fund. We go to our investors. So one of our holding companies is the #1 non-alcoholic beer in the United States, called Athletic Brewing. Another one is Aura Ring, this wearable. But when we saw, I was blown away with this product when I first saw it, and basically wanted to invest in it. I was blown away with Athletic Brewing when I first tried it. And pursued the CEO. I reached out to the CEO and basically said, look, if there's ever an opportunity to invest, please let me know. And we just developed a relationship, and sure enough, 6 to 12 months after we first met the CEO, he reached out and said, look, I actually do have an opportunity for you guys to invest. Benevolent Capital is the only investor into Athletic outside of the founding cap table, and they've had 2 very large strategics that have put some money in recently. But otherwise, I'm very proud of the fact that we got an investment into it. But that, again, that's an entrepreneurial approach to From my perspective, if your listeners are thinking about making similar leaps, the reality is you can find ways to invest in sports teams at a relatively small ticket. You can find ways to invest in companies at a relatively small ticket. There are ways for you to kind of make entrepreneurial efforts, green shoots, if you will. And that's exactly how it started for me in many respects. I mean, the initial investment into Arizona United was $250,000, and I'm not trying to make light of $250,000 is a lot of money, but on a relative basis in sports, it's actually can also be viewed as not a lot of money. That as an entry price into the space that I'm in now and where it is today, that wasn't the biggest ticket to kind of try to figure out how to navigate. And even if you don't have $250,000, can you find it from friends and family, and figure out a way to kind of put some pieces together and make that leap, if you will.
And let's speak about how people can actually get involved in sports investing a bit later. But I think, as you said, investing in Arizona, it wasn't the biggest move you've ever made, but it certainly sent you on a trajectory, if that's fair to say. If I followed you around between 2016 and 2017, if I was with you, say, every day, we were maybe writing a book about you, I don't know. But what would I have seen day in, day out?
Well, shortly after Bear Cay and a whole handful of other partners that came in to what we rebranded to Phoenix Rising, we made the decision to build a stadium in a great location. And it was a modular stadium, so it's not, it's these, in some respects, it's temporary stands, but it's a really nice venue. Yep. And being in the right location with the venue, with the stadium, a true soccer specific, getting out of a baseball stadium, watching football, if you will, in a baseball stadium is not what dreams are made of. So that where you would have found me that year was incredibly focused on getting the stadium capitalized, getting it opened, and then Bear Cay was the one who convinced Didier Drogba, which in my estimation is one of the greatest recruiting stories in professional sports. The fact that Didier Drogba, as big a legend as you get, both Chelsea and obviously Ivory Coast and everything he's done on and off the pitch, when he first mentioned he was going to get Didier Drogba to come play for us, I laughed. I truly thought he was joking. And then Bear Cay and I, as I said, are so close to each other today. I know if he says something, he's serious. And candidly, if he sets his mind to it, he's going to get it done.
And then when did that relationship start with Bear Cay? Was it before 2016? You'd known each other before, and that was when it made sense? Or I'm just trying to think from an investor standpoint. He clearly is a great partner for you. As you say, you've gone on to other ventures since. But when did that relationship begin? How did you find each other?
So it's fascinating because when I was negotiating to acquire Arizona United, ultimately my partner in Arizona United, I would meet with him and we would shake on a deal, and then I wouldn't hear from him for a couple weeks. And what I ultimately learned was he was actually negotiating with Bear Cay at the same time he was negotiating with me, and neither one of us knew it. Shortly after I made the investment in Arizona United, someone came up to me and asked me what happened to Bear Cay Buckeye. And anyway, I was able to realize that Bear Cay had also been trying to negotiate to acquire it. And Bear Cay, ultimately I had to try to find ways to get Bear Cay to understand that I wasn't aware that he was also bidding. If I had been aware of it, candidly, I would have said, look, let's partner up and do this together. But in short, I met a guy named Mark Detmer who had just moved to Los Angeles. And I had breakfast with Mark and started talking to him about Arizona United. And Mark said, well, you've got to meet my friend Bear Cay Buckeye. So Mark was the broker, if you will, to get Bear Cay to meet me. And I was very quick to explain to Bear Cay the background, and again, that I hadn't kind of poached Arizona United from him. But most importantly, I said, look, you and I both had an idea that Phoenix deserves a great professional soccer team, and let's effectively partner up and make this happen. And that's exactly what we did. So that was almost to the day 8 years ago. That was 2016. And so in the last 8 years, it started with Phoenix Rising, it extended to Ipswich, and now, as I said, we've got some food halls in California that we're involved in, and then Bear K and I are considering expanding our sports fund, which started with Ipswich. We're considering kind of growing that beyond just the singular holding that we have in Ipswich.
An analogy I was thinking as you were saying that is if, say, you have an interest account with 6% that you get every year, and every year you put $2,000 or whatever in. At the beginning, it doesn't seem like the needle is moving, but over a number of years, that compounding really does take form. And I feel like that's some of the trajectory that you've had, especially since 2014, 2016, as you say. Phoenix Rising was a quote-unquote moderate investment, certainly is in the world of sports investing, but since then it seems to have accelerated and expanded at quite a vast rate.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Early days, we were so singularly focused on getting Phoenix Rising like on the map, but once we did, it's kind of like compounded interest, if you will. Started to really think about how to grow it, if you will, and as I've said countless times, I feel like if you're in football, you need to be in England. There's nothing like English football. So I really coveted the opportunity and feel so blessed that we've now been able to be part of the Ipswich family. And obviously we've had a good run the last 3 years, and long may that, God willing, continue. And then, for me though, I focus now, I've shifted my time and attention to a great deal to Rhode Island. Yeah. And really pleased again to be in a position where I can start to see, a pathway where this stadium, it's a $140 million stadium for an expansion team in a minor league. So, second division league in the United States, in the smallest state in the Union, Rhode Island. I mean, a very, very special place, but that there are a lot of firsts that we are kind of checking in terms of that accomplishment. And then also one of many things to be proud of is that we're taking a part of the state. It's a city called Pawtucket that lost their baseball team. They lost their hospital. The site that we've now developed, the stadium site, was a brownfield site. It was contaminated. It's now been completely cleaned up. We've now building this world-class stadium where, if not for us, the power company was going to clean it up and fence it. And this would have been prime riverfront land that was basically fenced off from the public. And now we're leasing the adjacent land from the city, and we'll start to develop much needed housing. And, it's a project creating a ton of jobs and really moving sort of the social and economic needle, not only in Pawtucket, but also Rhode Island.
I know Rhode Island is what you spend a lot of time on day to day now, and you have been for a while. Again, a bit like that light bulb moment with Arizona, you're in the stadium, you turn to your wife and say, this seems like a good investment. Was it a similar situation with Rhode Island, or was it more of an inbound opportunity? How did that come about?
Well, on the second that I heard that the baseball team was picking up and leaving, that's when I committed to buying the rights. I literally called the league. I called United Soccer League up, and I bought the option to bring men's professional soccer. And, it was a fairly modest, if you will, down payment to acquire the rights. Then I flew in and I met with the governor of Rhode Island. I met with the mayor of Pawtucket, and they were very focused on my taking over the baseball stadium. The baseball team was picking up and leaving. They were going to have this empty stadium, and the stadium was really run down. It's a diamond. Baseball is a diamond, and soccer or football, if you will, is a rectangular. So I explained to them sort of the geometry didn't work, but I also said, look, the biggest issue with the stadium is 80 years ago when they built the stadium, it might have been the best location in Rhode Island. But today, it's in a very dense neighborhood. It's far off the highway. I went to school in Rhode Island for 4 years, and I knew there was a baseball team. I didn't know where they played. And so I always joke that when I write my book on sports ownership, it's going to be the shortest book ever. It's location, location, location. So where we're developing Tidewater Stadium, which is the sort of placeholder for it, is right off the highway. Okay. And it's right on this river, and every single car north and southbound will see the stadium. And so you just can't get a better location than that.
And growing the Rhode Island side, but also then going back to the Arizona piece, the challenges were different. Is that fair to say, or was it the challenges may have been different, but you used the same skills or same strategy to advance them both? Or is there no commonality between them at all?
No, there's some similarities. Just on a relative basis, the Rhode Island project is so much greater in terms of the total capital involved. $140 million stadium, public-private, so we have support from the state of Rhode Island, we have support from the city of Pawtucket, and then we have, I've raised a lot of private capital with my investors. So the scale and scope of Rhode Island is substantially greater than Phoenix Rising, but a lot of what I learned about launching a team with Phoenix Rising are applicable to launching a team in Rhode Island. There's parallels to it, but for sure the Rhode Island project is different because of the depth and breadth of what we've had to negotiate with so many different stakeholders, not just the city of Pawtucket, the state of Rhode Island, the power company. We've got a long-term lease on the stadium there. Just countless, and I'm blessed with an incredible partner who I brought into the project. The second phone call, as I say, I made after I bought the rights was to my partner, and he's a civil engineer by background and kind of eats, lives, breathes sports anchored development. If not for him, the project wouldn't get done. And I think something that I feel is important to point out is, while I get the credit for sort of the entrepreneurial vision, partners like Dan Krober, my partner in Rhode Island, he deserves the credit for actually getting it done. My twin brother and I, our favorite book, we quote it all the time. It's a book called Who Not How, and it's by a consultant here in the United States called Dan Sullivan. And in short, anything you want to get done, you have to find the right who. And Dan Krober was my who in that example. Like, he's someone who understood. When I received the RFP from the state of Rhode Island to develop this potential stadium site, I looked at it, it was like a foreign language. It was a foreign language for me. I had no idea how to respond to an RFP. When Dan received it, he looked at it and he said, okay, yeah, I can have this done, by this time. And that's exactly what he did. He literally ran with it. So I feel for your, if you will, your listeners that are thinking about sort of entrepreneurial ventures, if you will. At the end of the day, like, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately what you really need to do is, if you want to get something done, you have to figure out who the right who's are in your life to try to make things happen.
And we're talking in retrospect right now about all the things that happened from Rhode Island onwards. I'm interested to know, when you decided to buy the rights for Rhode Island, or you took it over, was there a meeting where you had this big master plan about what the next 5-10 years looked like for Rhode Island? Or did you come up with the strategy month by month as you were going, trial and error? How does that work in terms of your vision? Because I think for a lot of people that maybe want to get involved in sports investing or even start a business elsewhere, they can look across to other businesses that are very successful and think, oh, well, they had it planned out and it was very simple. But I just wonder, with you, did you have this big plan nailed out at the beginning, or was it a bit messier than that?
So I had a desire to bring professional soccer to Rhode Island, and I had an interest in building a brand new soccer-specific stadium that we could host a lot of other events there, other sports there. And I wanted a location that was outstanding, and I wanted something we could develop all the real estate around it. So those were sort of baseline, and that was from inception. I had recognized that Rhode Island, every time in the United States, or more often than not, if there's a World Cup soccer match, if there's men or women, if there's a Premier League game on television, Rhode Island as a market is almost always in the top 10 in the United States for viewership. And so I started to recognize that that was part of the research, if you will. It wasn't just that I was in Rhode Island and I heard the baseball team was leaving and I said, okay, I'll bring soccer. I already knew it was a strong soccer market that didn't have a team. And then the advent of losing their baseball team, I kind of figured there would be added motivation, if you will, to try to see a team come into that vacuum. But so I guess to specifically answer your question, I certainly had a thought of what I call professional sports anchored stadium and surrounding real estate as the baseline of my vision for Rhode Island. And the reason why real estate's important is that it's an added driver of ultimately returns on the overall enterprise. And increasingly, you can see it all over the world. You could see professional sports teams that increasingly are developing all the real estate or own and control or interested in the real estate around their stadiums. And so I'm basically taking a playbook from that, and I'm focusing on markets like Rhode Island, and I'm focusing on a sport like soccer through a league, United Soccer League.
How are we doing for time? Sorry, just
Yeah, good.
Sure. We're okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Maybe 20, 30 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think to that point, so you clearly had this strategy that you've just outlined around not only the stadium but the surrounding area, and I think Fortuitous Partners plays into that a bit. Was that something that you come up with at the time, or that you'd taken over the years from your experiences with Arizona and even before? Because obviously it sounds straightforward and impressive now, but coming up with that, I'm sure, isn't obvious if you don't know it, as simple as that sounds. So was that something that you just had in your mind all that time?
No, so to be more specific, in 2017, Congress passed, as part of the tax bill, they passed a program called the Opportunity Zone program. Yeah. And just briefly, that was a construct to motivate private investors to take capital gains and invest it into specific opportunity zones. And that could be, the opportunity zone is a physical location. And then if you start a business in that physical location, after a 10-year hold, all the appreciation ostensibly is tax-free. So when I saw that program, I started to, again, from an entrepreneurial perspective, I started to think to myself, well, that's a fantastic, sports teams are long-term holds. If this program had existed, I would have tried to use this program for my Arizona team, and you can't post date the program into already an existing business. So that really drove me to start to think about new markets, that program. So again, I started looking at it and I started to think, like, if I can take the best of that program with a new greenfield opportunity, launch a team through an OZ construct and develop all the real estate around it in an OZ construct, it had a lot of merit to it. So that was always the intent. And when I flew in and met with the governor of Rhode Island, I had done my research and kind of recognized that the land surrounding this stadium site was Opportunity Zone.
Okay.
So we negotiated a long-term lease with the city of Pawtucket to develop that surrounding real estate. The stadium site is actually owned by the power company, and we signed a 100-year lease on it. It was, as I said, a brownfield site that the power company completely cleaned up. You can't take a brownfield site and develop housing on it, but you can develop a stadium on it. And so, as far as I'm concerned, there was a lot of reasons why I call that fund Fortuitous Partners. Like, it was fortuitous that this program came about. It was fortuitous that there was this prime real estate that was going to get cleaned up that was perfect for a stadium. It was fortuitous that the land adjacent to it was owned by the city, and it also happened to be in an opportunity zone. So I guess sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, but all of those sort of planets aligned. And I think in terms of the entrepreneurial journey, the state of Rhode Island went out with a request for proposal. They can't just turn and award it. And it was a very competitive process. There were 6 respondees that all had visions in terms of how to develop this land. I think the advantage we had is, I think I was the only one that actually had the rights to bring a professional sports team into that market. And I think that differentiated us, because one of the tenets of the RFP was they were looking for a professional sports anchor development. So anyway, either way, we prevailed with that RFP. But technically speaking, if we hadn't prevailed, that's again a good example of sort of an entrepreneurial journey where all of a sudden they close the door, you lose the RFP, and now you got to kind of figure out how do you pivot, and do you try to find a different place in the state? Do you find a different place outside of the state? But sometimes it's like a board game where you roll the dice and you realize you got to move back 3 steps before you can start to figure out a way to go forward again.
Moving back 3 steps. Do you think now that you've got used to those challenges where things do go wrong, and it's almost, as you say, like a game where it is just about making the next move? Have you always had that mindset from early on, or is that something that you just learn and initially it's quite difficult and it's a bit stressful, but then you understand that it is just being about the next move?
I feel by nature I'm very, very optimistic.
Okay.
You know, and I feel that at least for me, that's been very helpful during my entrepreneurial journey. I genuinely believe that things will fall the right way, or I'll figure out how to navigate through stuff. Again, not to say that any of it's easy, but I think having a really positive outlook, is a pretty good prerequisite for being an entrepreneur. And again, it certainly helped me trade through some very, very tough situations. I mean, I sitting here right now, it's a pleasure for me to talk about what I call the depth and breadth of what I get to do. But again, going back 10 years ago, there was no guarantee that this was going to evolve to be kind of the diverse platform that's now. And I guess where I get really excited is I think about how much has transpired in the last 10 years. I get really fired up about what I think the next 10 years plus portends. Because I think in some respects, I'm getting quicker at being able to execute on things. You know, raise the capital, bring the right who's, get the right people involved, and rinse and repeat more often. And grants of my twin brothers and my private equity stuff, we've been accelerating the amount of special purpose vehicles we have for capital raises. Excuse me. And so that all of the platforms, the private equity, venture capital, the real estate, and the sports, in some respects, I have the ability to kind of, as I said, accelerate it because of all the experience over the last 10 years. But I also think, as I like to say, I've got a healthy paranoia in terms of wanting to make sure I don't take on too much too fast, and I will be very focused. I was talking to an prospective investor yesterday, and I was basically saying, like, look, I will be committed to the success of Rhode Island for the rest of my life. Like that's something that's part of my DNA now, and I'm not going to rest until the stadium is one of the best assets in Southern New England, till the Rhode Island men's team is very profitable, both on the pitch, off the pitch, all the surrounding real estate. So it's a project that I'm committed to. But that being said, it starts to open doors where you start to think, okay, what else can I do? Are there other markets where I can look at sports anchored real estate? And that's where it starts to get exciting, because again, that hard earned experience, you can start to say, okay, well, the next time I'm not going to do things this way. This is a better approach. And by the way, I think I'm also at the position where I'll probably, with Rhode Island, as I said, there was nothing going to stop me from trying to get that done. Where I could see in other markets where I'd sit there and say, the reality is, if I'm not going to force it, if you will, I'm not going to do, like, if I'm going to take a good shot on it, if it doesn't come through, I'm going to move on to the next market. Because, the biggest issue we all have as entrepreneurs is time at the end of the day. There's only so much of it.
And I think it's clear you're just having so many different ideas now, and that potentially has grown over the years. But it all started with that one point in 2014. Potentially even before that, but I think to listeners as well, I'm just going to direct at the camera, but it's easy to see everything that you're doing now and think, wow, this is like insane, you're doing X, Y, and Z. But it started at one point, and so to have those thoughts, you need to start off maybe with something simple, something small. Yeah. And then just let it grow. It isn't a case of trying to think of everything at once. That will come with time.
Yeah.
But it does come with that small point. And for you, that seems to be Phoenix Rising.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, sitting here talking about this and dwelling on it and positively, it makes me kind of reflect. I wonder where I'd be, what I'd be doing, if you will, if I hadn't just decided to watch that MLS game on that Sunday and hadn't listened to the commissioner of the league start talking about the expansion at halftime. And again, to get, in some respects, religious, like, in my mind, it was meant to happen. It was like, it was a little bit of destiny, if you will. Like, again, I think, if you will, I'll point to the universe kind of opened up the door, and the question is, I guess I walked through that door, and I continue to walk through that door. But again, hopefully, for those that are listening, what I would encourage you is, if you feel you've got an idea, is try to pursue it. Try to, recognize like that. It very, very well could be effectively, the universe kind of hinting at you that this is what you're destined to do. And I try to say it with, as I say, I try to say it with complete humility. I feel very blessed with what I get to do. None of it's been easy, but I love it. I kind of wake up early in the morning. I stay up late, and I also try to balance life with my wife and my kids, and not working all the time. But again, I feel very, very happy that I've been able to kind of trade through and, as I say, firmly establish myself as an entrepreneur that I think can rinse and repeat on a host of different things. And in many respects, I'm backing other entrepreneurs now. That's partly, what the platform's about, which is also gets exciting.
And you could say it is like fortuitous to something that we've already said, but you also did have to walk through that door. So it's that quote, isn't it? Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Lots of other people would have had that opportunity, but you were one of the only people or the only person willing to walk through that. So yes, I agree with what you say. Some things are just meant to be. It definitely seems like that. But at the same time, you can put the odds in your favor by willing to walk through that door and actually execute on your ideas.
Yeah, so again, I feel like a lot of individuals are born to be entrepreneurs. They just don't know it. And from my perspective, I guess sitting here right now, I hope they figure that out. Because if that's what you're destined to be, then Godspeed, and it's a great place to be. But again, I guarantee every single one who's contemplating that, none of it will be easy. I guarantee it. Doesn't matter. But I also, look, that being said, there are a lot of people who candidly have zero interest in starting a restaurant, starting whatever entrepreneurial venture it is. I mean, that's just different. It's just the way people are wired certain ways. Some people are fantastic in all types of environments, and then some people are just literally have something in their DNA where they want to be their own boss. They want to create their own things, and the way I view my father in particular, incredible success story, self-made, American, true American story in terms of kind of coming over multi generations ago from Ireland with nothing. And my dad worked his way through schools, started his own company, plural. But he's one of these entrepreneurs where if you took everything away from him, he would start over again and he'd figure it out. And there are so many entrepreneurs like that, Richard Branson, you could literally, at any point in his career, strip everything away from that guy, and the next day he'd be starting something new. No doubt about it, and it would be ultimately be successful. And so, I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship is figuring out how to just make things happen, but constantly looking at what the art of the possible is in terms of creating companies.
But is that the common trait? So you said earlier that you see the world in a very optimistic way. Is that something that your father also sees the world in an optimistic way? And is that the core component for stripping everything away and could just start again? Is that the trick, or is it more complex than that?
Good question. Great question in my mind. I mean, I'm sure someone who studies this stuff would probably, does a lot of interviews. I'm sure there are a lot of pessimistic entrepreneurs, if you will. And I suspect in some respects that trait is probably very valuable as an entrepreneur, if you will. So I'm sure, again, you have introverts, you have extroverts, you have optimists, you have pessimists, every walk of life that's kind of been able to forge a way to become a successful entrepreneur. But again, I know what I'm at peace with is I'm doing exactly what I should be doing, and what I hope is anything that I talk about, maybe it serves as a motivator to others that, the reality is if you have a desire to become an entrepreneur, you really just need to figure out how to take the leap, and ideally, look, the reality is I'm very passionate about what I do. I love what I do. Like entrepreneurship for the sake of entrepreneurship can be soulless as well, if you will. Like in an ideal world, you've really got to sort of, I mean, in some respects, you're a perfect example. A year ago, you decide, what do I want to do? And you start this platform and you start to interview these entrepreneurs. I mean, it's a perfect example where at some point you had an epiphany and said, okay, I'm doing this. And now look at it a year later. Just think about where you're going to be 10 years from now.
And It is. I mean, I'm the one asking questions often, but then I rarely reflect myself, and that's sometimes the issue.
Right.
But then, no, you're right. It is that compounding. I wouldn't have thought I'd be sat here a year ago. It is, yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's a big privilege. Yeah, I mean, I think I probably need to reflect more on that. I suppose just turning over to you though. I mean, Rhode Island, and feel free to answer this as high level as you want, but Rhode Island wasn't your last encounter or involvement with a football team. There's one more that you have been recently involved with. Again, appreciate there's bits around this, we can edit this out. But roughly, just how did that come about? Is that again a similar strategy that you've had with Rhode Island or Phoenix, or are they just completely different in the approaches that you're taking?
Sorry, specifically with Ipswich?
Yeah.
So again, when I got involved with Phoenix Rising, or Arizona United to Phoenix Rising, I think it was the 5 years living in London. As I described it, I had a front row seat to the Premier League. And I feel like English football from Premier League down is like the equivalent of the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. Like there's just something magical about English football. And my attitude was, once I got into the space, I had it in my head, I wanted to be, if I had a chance, I wanted to be in England. Like, I really coveted the opportunity to find a way to invest and own a football club in England. And I, as I say, I just feel very, very fortunate to play whatever small role that I play relative to the fact that we took a League One team 3 years ago. Ipswich, the gravitas, the historical gravitas of Ipswich is staggering. You know, FA Cup, Premier League, Champions League. And kind of, as I view it, kind of restored it back to its rightful place in the Premier League. But, you know, as I said, long may that continue. But English football and foreign football in general is a different equation. You're really betting on, can you get promoted? You're really hoping you can get to the Premier League and get the media rights deals that you can, and kind of ultimately get the equity value and cash flow to a point where you've really built something special. That's a very different model than what I'm pursuing in the United States, where I focus on teams where I hire and I look to retain young talent that's just starting their careers, that if I can give them quality minutes, hopefully they go on and do amazing things. Like, I really view my role in the United States as focusing on developing players and then finding ways to truly make the platform sustainable. You know, the team should cash flow, the stadium should cash flow, the surrounding real estate should cash flow. That from an investment perspective, I'm as I like to say in the States, I'm positively obsessed with sustainability. And sustainability comes about by the entire venture effectively being profitable. I'm not interested in just perpetual capital calls over the life of an asset. That's not a fun place to be.
Looking back at your time, so we've talked about Phoenix, we've talked about Rhode Island, a little bit about Ipswich, but lots of other people may have tried and possibly failed at similar ventures. And it has been, I would say, objectively, you've been pretty successful with what you've been involved with. I would say maybe if you've been involved with one and it went okay or well, that you could say maybe that's a lot of luck and there's lots of luck involved. But to do it consecutively over a number of years, there must be some constant in that. Do you ever look back and think, well, why me? Why has it gone so well so far? Or actually do you rationalize it and say, well, no, I've got this trait, this trait, this trait. It is obvious to me why it's going well because I do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so to be clear, I certainly have had ventures that have not succeeded. I've clearly had investments that failed, if you will. From a timeline perspective, they were before, I owned a team in Tucson where I tried to get a stadium deal done. I couldn't get a stadium deal done, and so I sold the Tucson team to some local partners there. I was part of a venture in Denmark where we owned a team called Helsinger, and we were right on the precipice of getting promoted. For a second time, it didn't happen, and then again, the ownership group decided to sell to some local partners there. So again, I just want to make sure everyone's aware. Like, it hasn't been all, it's not like I should go buy a lottery ticket because everything's just coming up winning. But more often than not, I mean, again, I think it's partly being what I view now more of a veteran entrepreneur, where been able to figure out how to trade through things and get them to the point where they're stable, but I also think if you look at the private equity and venture capital approach that my brother and I have, we really, because we don't have a dedicated fund, we have to be very, very disciplined to feel in our heart that it's got exponential upside, like non-alcoholic. We saw 5-6 years ago, we saw the trend where people were going to start to shift to non-alcohol. And Athletic Brewing, where our first investment, was the best tasting non-alcoholic beer I'd ever tried. It was a no-brainer to me that was going to go up. What we got lucky was being able to get, we've made 3 investments in Athletic. So I guess to try to answer your question, everyone's got to feel that adversity, and everyone's got to, in some respects, like, again, taste some elements of failure. I feel to ultimately certainly appreciate when it's going right, and I knock on wood and every single day, and again, have a healthy paranoia and try to approach everything I do with complete humility, because there's a lot of things that are, at the end of the day, that are out of your control. But to that point, whatever that I truly control, I want to try to do as best I can day in and day out for myself and for my extended investors and all in the extended portfolio. And again, more often than not lately, it's been going up and to the right, which is great.
I mean, flipping that on its head, if you'd started all of these and were determined for them to fail, what would be the approach you would take?
Well, sports investing, unless you inherited an NBA team or NFL team, or you're a billionaire and you bought one of those assets, I mean, that's those don't fail. Those aren't going to fail. So sports investing outside of the majors, if you will, that's none of that stuff's for the faint of heart. Like, in many respects, a great deal of that investment, sports investment, is arguably not sustainable. Too many clubs, and it's not just soccer clubs, football clubs, too many sports assets that are losing too much money on a consistent basis. And everyone kind of praying that the media rights gods are going to come and save them. And so again, what I like about where I focus in the States on USL is that in the size stadium that I have, with the payroll that I have, with the players at the stage of their careers that we focus on, that there's a very clear pathway where the team and the stadium and, as I say, the surrounding real estate can all be profitable, and that's what I'm looking to get to, and that's what I'm looking to once I get there, to start to find other opportunities to repeat that, copy and paste that, and so I will look eventually. I'll look for other markets to start to ideally replicate the success, if you will, of what we have in Rhode Island.
I'm sure those opportunities will come. I think we're coming to the end of the conversation. There's a couple of bits I just wanted to ask you. So, aside from football in the US, which I still think is emerging, I mean, that's partly why it's gone so well in some areas, because it's a hugely high growth sector. But in the context of entrepreneurship and growing a business and investments, is there anything you feel strongly about, Brett, that no one else really understands, or very few people get, that you really at your core you feel strongly about?
Well, I maybe should have highlighted that it was the 5 years in London, and it was the 5 years traveling all over the world, where, as I describe it, I had a front row seat to witness the religion by which the world reveres the other football, meaning soccer. And so when I came back to the States, I had a theses plural, that the United States would catch up in terms of what I call our quality on the pitch. And the women have been fantastic. They've been, world class. But I really believe that U.S. men at some point will really compete. And, if not, potentially at some point actually be able to have a good enough team that could actually win a World Cup. I believe that. But I also felt strongly that Americans would really start to appreciate the beautiful game. What I'll call the beauty of a 1-1 tie, if you will. And that's clearly happening. And with World Cup coming back to the States in 26. So again, what I feel strongly about is I love the role I get to play on whatever small basis in terms of investing in soccer in the United States, and both helping to develop domestic players, but also foreign players that get quality minutes at the teams that I'm part of, and ideally will go on to very, very bright careers with really, really prominent clubs. But can say, look, I had a small part in that, and so I love that, and I'm looking forward. I'm very interested in women's soccer. I love the thought of, and I love to see what's going on in the growth of women's sports right now, and in a host of sports, basketball, obviously soccer, rugby's been interesting, and cricket. I mean, there's been countless examples in the last year. There's been a massive tipping point in terms of women's sports truly arriving. And as I like to say, long may it continue. And I look forward to playing a role and being a part of it as well, however I can. And I have the ability to do that because I can add a women's team to my stadium in Rhode Island.
Going back to almost where we started, you're working at Targus, and you have a very senior role there, and you've worked at other companies before. Now you're in the sports investing world, and you see the job differently. Is it fair to say, or I'd be interested to get your view, how did you feel day in, day out in those sorts of jobs, in terms of, did you really enjoy it? Were you looking forward to actually cracking on with the day? And how do you feel now? Is it just a remarkably different experience? Does it even feel like work now?
It doesn't feel like work now, that's for sure. I never come away now from a day and kind of feel like, oh God, no matter what I do today, I love it. And no 2 days are alike. I'm kind of blessed to be focusing on a host of diverse projects. And so it keeps me busy and it keeps me fresh with all this stuff. None of it's a grind, if you will. But early days at Targus, I was young and I was traveling and I was, seeing parts of the world, and I had responsibility that was really intoxicating, if you will. And it was all kind of new and it was exciting. So as I say, I really, really felt very fortunate. And there was an element of it was entrepreneurial. Certainly when I was running all the international business, I had the means of figuring out where we should invest, country managers to start to open up territories where we should potential product lines we should start to think about going into, factories we should start working with. So again, I feel so fortunate from all of that experience. But I think if I was still doing it today, technically speaking, if I was still at Targus today, it wouldn't be as fun, if you will. It's just a long, long time to run them. And that's probably where a lot of times people in that kind of career path, they have a set idea of like, I'm going to work till this age and then I'll retire. But I think if you're an entrepreneur, you have a different mindset. I certainly have no desire to ever retire. I certainly at some point will have the desire to slow down. I'll certainly be a lot more selective over things I take on or trips that I commit myself to. But by no means do I ever look that there'll be a day where I'm retired. I love, and I will really look forward to having a diversity of businesses that I'm involved with, till my last day on this beautiful earth. And again, not because I'm a workaholic, but just because I think it keeps you young, and I think, it's stuff that I enjoy doing, if you will.
What is reassuring and absolutely love over the last hour of conversation we've had is that I think we've said there are so many things going on now in the context of sports investing, and you're clearly absolutely loving it, and there's more opportunities to come. The next 10 years, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I love the fact it all started really with a single point that evening at Arizona, where you thought, okay, maybe this is the investment. I think for others listening, it is that just single point where it might not seem big and grandiose at the time, but that then leads to more thoughts, and you sort of go down that tunnel, and then who knows where you are if you keep on grinding, you're optimistic, you keep the momentum going. I just think it's a hugely reassuring and positive message.
Well, I agree with you, and I guess as I view it, I love being invested in sports. And I tell my investors, there is no investment that you'll make that you and your family, and by extension your friends, won't have more joy than being invested in sports. I've seen it empirically. And again, fortunately, more often than not, whether it's been Phoenix Rising, whether it's been Ipswich, and even Rhode Island now, we had an incredible come from behind win this past Saturday. We was at the stadium with investors. I was there with some board members. I was there with my family and a host of friends. That experience, you just get, it's a high from that experience. Like, it's just, there's nothing like it. That's why we all, most of us just love sports at the end of the day. So if you have the opportunity to literally be invested in sports, it's a whole nother level. I mean, it's truly, it's like the difference between liking children and actually having your own children, if you will.
And finally, for those that want to get involved in sports investing, maybe they're in the US or the UK, I appreciate slightly different markets, but practically how can you do that?
So increasingly, there's so many different leagues that are starting up, that are emerging leagues that are looking for capital where, and again, I don't know the sport too well, but padel, which is very popular in Spain, that's starting to grow up here. Pickleball, so just pick some racket sports. I mean, there's a sailing league that's doing very, very well now. Big ticket items in that one. But what I'd say, I know they're starting a track and field professional league. Like, it's an incredible time to be involved in sports, and there's a lot of emerging leagues in sports that are coming about. And I guarantee every single one of them. I mean, Tiger Woods is launching a new golf league with Rory, and anyway, like the list, someone who's could rattle off, I'm sure, 30 different investment opportunities in emerging sports that, again, if you're particularly motivated, you could probably figure out how to invest in and start to literally get involved with them. And I'm sure some of the tickets are not, out of the reach of a lot of your listeners, if you will. And again, you could start to look at, just put it in perspective. If you have the ability to invest $25,000, do you have 9 other friends that could do the same? And then you have $250,000, and could that be enough of a syndicate where if you went to someone and said, look, I've got $250,000 and I want to have a board seat and I want to help start this league and I want to raise more capital? I think the pathway all exists there, but it's a question of, is that what you want to do? Are you passionate about it? Like, do you truly believe in it? And then at the end of the day, for me, I've been fortunate to kind of, as I say, bet on myself. Like, someone didn't turn to me and say, I'd like to buy Ipswich, and I just put some money behind them and prayed that they would go well. Like, I've been very, very fortunate. So I get approached all the time on things, and most of the time I'm a hard pass, just because I'm not going to take the leap in putting money behind someone else's venture, not because I don't believe in them, but just I have enough of my own stuff to bet on. And also, as I said, I can handle betting on myself a lot more than being sort of a limited partner in someone else's venture that I just don't have much oversight or control in.
What once was probably a billionaire's game is being democratized as the years go on. I have no doubt that will continue to happen.
100%. And then in the States, there's now these funds that are taking minority stakes in all the big leagues. And I don't know what their minimums are. I suspect they're still pretty high. But the reality is family offices are now owning stakes in NBA teams. At some point, NFL will start to take that money as well. So you can have stakes in these clubs. But there's also, I think Watford just did a crowdfunding deal. I know Orange County and the USL did a crowdfunding deal. And so there are there's lots of ways for what I call fans to start to get literally ownership in clubs that resonate with them. And I think that's positive. I suspect, though, some of them are investing not so much for the pure return on investment, but the fact that they can literally sit there and say, hey, this is my club and I actually own a stake in it. That gives me a great deal of pride.
Well, coming back to it, that's sometimes why people start things, not necessarily for the ultimate financial success, but just because they love it and see where it goes.
Green Bay Packers, the football team in America, is owned by its fans, if you will, and it's about as loyal a fan base as you'll find anywhere in the world.
Brett Johnson, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Will, thanks. What an absolute honor. Really enjoyed the time together.
Amazing. Thank you.
Perfect.
Brill.
All right, my
excellent.
friend. Good.
Thank
That was
you.
great. I enjoyed it.